Good afternoon. On behalf of the Cultural Department, it is my distinct pleasure to introduce this afternoon's panel with writer and director Ruben Polendo and several of the people in the NYU Abu Dhabi Institute and TDIC Cultural Department presentation of the Ramayana. The Ramayana is important to the mission and vision of the Cultural Department, for whom I speak today. I'm the Public Programs Manager for the Cultural Department. And the Ramayana is important to us because it is an essential story within Indian culture, which has been intimately entwined with the culture of this region for centuries. It is therefore important for us to explore, share, and foster understanding of this story. For in doing so, we can come to better understand and appreciate the rich and diverse heritage of the UAE. Today, we are joined by Joshua Shirley, who plays Ravana, sorry. Emily Egan, who plays Krushalya. Youngne Choi, who plays Sita. And Sashith Sheravatur, who is the dramaturg for this performance. All of these people are students at NYU Abu Dhabi, and for many of them, this is their first performance, so I congratulate you all for a successful run. Today's panel, yes, round of applause. Today's panel will be moderated by Ruben Polendo, and I wanted to give you a brief biography on Ruben because he has quite an astounding set of credentials backing him up in this production. He is the director and playwright for tonight's performance and is focused on different traditions of the world stage. He's the founder of the New York-based Theater Me Too, which researches world theater performance traditions and incorporates them into performances of original and established works. His own research and teaching interests emphasize whole theater, the rigorous exploration of the visual, oral, emotional, intellectual, and spiritual tenets of performance. In addition to his scholarly work, Polendo produces theatrical productions that bring these ideas to life. His recent productions include a radical take on Arthur Miller's Death of a Salesman that incorporates traditions of vaudeville, Japanese no and buto, puppetry, and Balinese masks, and the original play, The Shakespeare Project, that blends Shakespearean language with performance traditions from Tibetan Buddhism, Okinawan dance, and others. He has received numerous fellowships and has been an invited speaker at performance hubs around the world. Internationally, he has taught and led artist training programs, and he is currently a teacher at NYU Abu Dhabi. I now give the floor to Ruben Polendo.
Thank you so much, sir. Thank you, and thank you for joining us for this conversation with some of the collaborators from the Ramayana. I think before we start the question and answer, I just want to give a little bit of a framing for the project at large. This is NYU Abu Dhabi's first student production in the history of the university, and there's very particular reasons why this production was chosen. The Ramayana, of course, is an incredibly important tale throughout South Asia and Southeast Asia, but is also an incredibly important part of the literary canon. To me, as the conversation arose in terms of a student production for NYU Abu Dhabi, there were two things that were important. One was the artistic source that this production would be based on. The Ramayana, to me, seemed an important match for several reasons. One of them is the idea of decentralizing away from the Western canon into an Eastern canon, which seemed really important. The other, as Tyrone mentioned, is the idea that South Asia, in particular India, is absolutely part of the region that Abu Dhabi and the Gulf is woven through. And the last, which is, to me, in a way, a very compelling one, is when I encountered the story, which was many years ago, I heard it told to me and was so moved by it that I felt incredibly frustrated as I had conversations worldwide and found again and again that people didn't know the story. That you could come to anyone, particularly in the West, that you could come to someone and say Romeo and Juliet, and they would say, oh yes, I know what that is. But when you said Rama and Sita, the faces drew a blank. And I thought, how could you not know the story of Rama and Sita? And I would start telling it, and I would feel like everybody should know it. And so as the question of a production here at NYU Abu Dhabi started, I was very much driven by this desire to tell the story, as well as a secondary motive, which was this idea of engaging in a different canon of work The last reason, which is perhaps the most germane one in terms of the student production, was the themes that the Ramayana holds. For me, the Ramayana is very much questions that deal with love, but at the core, I believe that the piece deals with ideas of journeys. And I think there's many, many, many layers of journeys that happen through the piece. There's journeys of adulthood. There's journeys about love, of course. There's journeys about pride. And the piece, in a way, reinvents again and again the narrative of how you travel through these journeys, of how you mature through these journeys. Ultimately, the piece travels you, in its most simple version, through the exile of a young man and his travels as he begins to discover love, his own fears, his own demons, his own strengths. And to me, that became a really exciting thing to bring to the table and to engage a group of students who they themselves are going through the beginning of what I believe to be a really potent journey, and to engage them in a conversation about exactly that. So this, the hope is that frames a bit as to why the Ramayana was brought to the table as the first NYU Abu Dhabi student production. Further, the production, of course, as is the nature of theater, is a collaboration. And so this is a collaboration with Theater Me Too, which is my theater company based both in New York and in Abu Dhabi, as well as with TDIC in the Saudi Art Cultural District, to be able to bring this piece not only to the NYU Abu Dhabi community, but to Abu Dhabi at large. So again, that's a bit of a framing, but my hope is to engage 3 of the actors and 1 of the collaborators, all of them students at NYU Abu Dhabi, in a brief conversation about the Ramayana. And to start off, I'd love to ask a general question, then travel through each of you in terms of your answer. I wonder if you could, first and foremost, tell us your name and your year, school, and your intended course of study and where you're from, just so we have a little bit of a sense. And then I'll throw the first question at you guys. We can start with you, Sachin.
I am Sachin Cheruvatur. I'm from Kerala. I'm a freshman, and I'm majoring in philosophy. And I got involved with this. Can I go on? Yeah. I got involved with this program because Ramayana has always played a big role in my life. All the way from school rituals, we used to celebrate this week called Ramayana Week, where we recited the Sanskrit slokas, and we had competitions based on the Ramayana. And back home, it was a part of the culture, and many of the moral values we were instructed and we were taught based on things in the Ramayana. So I mean, I was really excited that Professor Ruben wanted to do this, and I got involved immediately.
My name is Young Mei Choi. I'm currently a sophomore, and I think my major is theater, and I'm from South Korea.
Hi, I'm Josh. I play Ravana in the Ramayana. I am a political science and philosophy double major, and I'm from Australia.
My name is Emily Egan. I'm from Michigan in the United States. I'm a sophomore, and I'm currently studying creative writing and theater.
Sachi just started us with a bit of an answer to a question, which is, in terms of the Ramayana and having a different relationship to it, I wonder if you could speak a little bit as to what your relationship was to the piece, or to the source, which is this epic poem, before you got involved in this, or before you read it for the first time, and how that relationship has changed as you've been working on the production, of course, embodying these characters. We'll start with you, Josh, and then we'll go to the ladies.
Well, I'd never heard of the Ramayana before I took a class with you in freshman year in Reinventions of Love, where we took it on as a love story, and it is an epic love story. Outside of coming to Abu Dhabi, actually, I'd never heard of it before. My relationship with the Ramayana changed the more and more I heard from Sachin and from others about all of the other surrounding rituals. In a way, this play and this production focuses on the main storyline of Rama and Sita, but there are many other side stories, and if the epic in its full length, as you know, is extremely long, and there is so much detail in it. My relationship to it, it's become one of my favorite love stories, actually. It's replaced, for me, things that, like Romeo and Juliet. So, and for a lot of the play, I am actually, released for a lot of Act 1, I'm sitting on the stage watching it, and it's one of my, I think I have the best seat in the house, at least for Act 1. And it's heartbreaking, it's moving, it's I'm overjoyed. It's all of these things at once. It's a lot of fun, really.
Like Josh, I hadn't actually heard of the Ramayana before Professor Ruben introduced us to it in class when he had us read the text. And I really wasn't sure how to relate to it at first because all I knew was that it was coming out of a Hindu mythology, and so I wasn't sure how to relate to it or what it was going to be like. But I remember the first time that I read it, as I started to read it, and there are all these tales of gods and of demons, it actually made me think a lot about the Odyssey, and that was how I related to it at first. But then as I went on, it became more and more of this really amazing and really, really moving love story that really started to touch me. But it was also so epic in its nature that it was a little difficult to grasp completely. And I think that actually ended up being one of the hardest things for me when we started going into the show. I was so excited to be a part of something this amazing and this huge, but at the same time to try to embody something so massive and so epic. And also as I began to talk to some of my Indian friends and hearing their stories about how they grew up with it and what a massive part of their culture and their childhood this story was, really started to give it its own unique shape.
I think that's a really important point. One of the big approaches in terms of staging the Ramayana has been how one enters that story. And I think what's moving to me about that story, and Sajid and I had many conversations about this, is the fact that the story is incredibly porous. And by that I mean that it has so many entry points, right? Yeah. So that if you tell it to a child, there's a way that a child will relate to the adventure and the action and some of the more heroic moments or more villainous moment. And if you tell it to someone who is in a moment in their life where they're asking questions about love, they'll hear the love story and they'll hear questions of doubt and fear and jealousy. If it is someone who is in a moment of family, they will hear a story of family and how a family contends with these challenges. And so for me, it's very exciting that it has that many entry points. And I think a key one, and both of you have addressed this, is that it can be entered both as a spiritual text that's deeply entrenched within Hindu tradition. It can be a cultural text that's deeply linked into Indian tradition, but it can also be a mythological text so that it's speaking on a more universal level as well in the way that the Odyssey speaks or in the way that these great works of literature speak. And I think for us, and it's something I approached the cast with and my collaborators, was that though it would have all of those other entry points by definition, that ultimately our entry point would be one of mythology, one that spoke of a shared dream that was being explored. And so I think it's a similar journey that you speak of, Emily, that I had in encountering it. I was very moved by it and found myself questioning, well, why am I moved by it, right? I don't have the cultural link that, as Sajid mentioned, has infused his childhood and his growing up, but yet it moves me in a really deep way. And I think it's that reminded me of this kind of mythological link that these stories have. They're speaking of greater questions and greater universal goals. So I think that's a great point. Young Nay?
So I also never heard of the Ramayana before I started the production. And I guess the relationship with the Ramayana changed throughout the rehearsal process, because the rehearsal process wasn't just about acting and about the play itself, but we studied so much and we heard many stories from our dramaturg about Hindu mythologies, and that was another journey that was involved in preparing this production and just learning about the gods, and you start to have this affection for gods and their flaws, and you cry with them and you just want to know more about their stories. So it's not just about the characters in the play, but we start to know about this other gods, and we know the other stories that are not told in the Ramayana. So that kind of enriched the experience.
And this links to the next question, which is, I wonder if you could talk a little bit about the role that you play in the Ramayana and what you believe to be the greatest challenge of that role, and that includes the role of dramaturg in terms of how you felt both prepared for it and possibly unprepared, and in a way had to develop that preparedness over the rehearsal. But the core of the question being the challenge of the role or roles that you play. Maybe start with you, Emily.
Yes. I actually play multiple roles, but I generally think of my main role as being that of Kaushlia, who is Rama's mother. And at first, when I was cast as Kaushlia, I thought it would be pretty straightforward because in high school I've had to play a mother multiple times. It's just something that happens to me. And so I was like, okay, I'm playing a mama again. This is, I know how to do this. This will be fine. And then I went in, and as we started looking deeper into the mythologies and into the aspects of these characters and where they were coming from and the nature of the story itself, it actually became really difficult for me in some senses, especially, I think I touched on this a little, just the epic nature of the story. All of a sudden I began to feel like this was such a massive story and a massive tale, and it meant so much to so many people that I couldn't really embody this character. How could I try to take on the role of this mother, like the mother of Rama, who this whole giant story is unfolding? And I was afraid to let her be more human. And this is actually something Ruben and I had a long discussion about just the other day before we had our first audience, just letting her be human, even though she is part of this epic landscape. A massive part of that landscape really is the humanity and the flaws and the emotions behind all of these characters in this landscape. And that's been a really incredible journey for me personally as an artist and as just a person, just exploring that and what that means to be part of something so massive and yet so human at the same time.
Thank you. Young Nay, will you go next?
Yeah, it's actually similar to what Emily said. I also thought these characters are epic, but at the same time they're human beings. So how am I going to connect to these characters? The most difficult thing for me was, as a student actor and learning acting, I just couldn't think about, so I'm pregnant, and I've never been pregnant. What does it feel like to be pregnant? But that was the weird, I had just weird things going on in my head in the beginning. And I also talked
in terms of how to imagine clearly what the character would be going through. Yeah.
And I also talked about this with Ruben just before we started. And in the beginning of the rehearsal process, I thought acting had to be a very subconscious process. You have to just be driven by your impulses and emotions. So, but throughout the rehearsal process, I think I kind of developed how to make this process a conscious one, and trying to understand this character as an actor. And when I am the character, I'm showing empathy towards these characters, and that I'm driven by clear purpose when I'm saying my lines, not just by my emotions, but how to balance that, I think.
Sachin?
When I started, I think the first channel was trying to find out what a dramaturg is and what he does. So I was never involved in theater, and this is the first time I was involved in it. And I remember an instance where Ruben told me, you know what, you can actually come and tell me that when you want to. And I was like, I can actually do that? Is that part of my role? And it was actually a discovery of what a dramaturg does. And after I understood it, I had this monumental obstacle in front of me, which was I had this sentimental attachment to the Ramayana, and to try and view it in a different way than the way that have been presented all throughout my childhood was actually very difficult. And Ruben has adapted versions from all around Southeast Asia, and there are differences in these versions, and differences that I wasn't aware of. And regularly Ruben would come and tell me, Sachit, I know this is going to upset you, but this scene is going to go like that. And I would be like, oh yeah, could we maybe do a little, no, we have to do it like this. This is how the scene. So I think one of the main challenges was to understand that there are different points of view, even to a sentimental attachment, a religious play, a spiritual play. And to accept this and to see it from that point of view, and to accept that there exists another point of view as legit as the one you've been exposed to, was a great difficulty.
And I would add that one of the things that was very exciting was actually that by the nature of NYU Abu Dhabi, we have an incredibly international group of students, and it truly is that. And so the cast, which is made up of 19 people, as well as about 25 apprentices who are working on the production as assistant directors, as documentarians, as production, as design assistants, on many, many levels, they, in a wonderful way, complicate the interpretation even further, because it truly is different belief systems, different cultural systems, different personal feelings. And what was terrific was sitting with the text, with this group of not only actors and students, but also people from different parts of the world, and in a way to elasticize that text so that in a way it became a text that fit all of us, that started reflecting and refracting your own thoughts and your own opinions. And I think for me that was really revelatory, including what was exciting was to have people who had never heard of it, and then to have people who had heard of it in their childhood and then left it, and then have people who knew it really well, and to hear them hear it through somebody else and then have a conversation, right? So it ultimately became a really level playing ground, because though the Ramayana was new or not to different people, ultimately the stage adaptation of our production of the Ramayana was new to everybody. And so we all had to bring everything we could, our questions, our interests, our histories, and enrich in the production as a whole. Josh, going back to the question.
Yeah, so I play Ravana, who is essentially the most evil demon that has ever lived in this mythology. And I guess challenge number one is finding a way to be that epic and that evil. To be the kind of thing, not that children dream of as some clumsy monster that gives them nightmares, but more the kind of sophisticated, calculated, cold, mechanical, brutal, and savage demon that would give me nightmares, as I am. And to play a character that epic was very difficult. To find a place of with enough power that I could make a whole room full of people believe that I was about an inch away from killing everyone around me at all times. And that's a very, very strange and new thing for me. I've never felt that before. And it was something that I gradually got used to. The last show that we did, kids had to leave because they were a little bit too scared, which I think means I'm finally achieving my goal, sad as that is. But it was very hard to find a way to do that, but the more that we got through the rehearsal process, the more I could draw on different myths of Ravana and different images of him, and trying to take all of the strengths from those images and from those ideas and trying to bring that all into what I was doing. And I had to try and make it a conscious process, as young Mary was saying, because there was no way just subconsciously I was going to transform into this Rakshasa, this demon of the epic Ramayana. I had to consciously think about ways it could be more cold, more calculating. That was very strange and very challenging for me.
Great, thank you. One of the things, and I discuss this with the cast and collaborators often, is that ultimately our work lives in memory, right? That there's a way that theater exists in the moment, and of course when you leave the theater, you take it with you. And what is interesting is that all of these wrestlings that we had in terms of how to build it, how to develop a conscious process, how to balance the knowing and the not knowing of the story and the discovering it through other eyes, the idea of inhabiting skins that are totally outside of your own, or to do so in a way that's different, right? Like those challenges, I believe, begin to make it a really interesting landscape to witness on so many levels as an audience. And what's been exciting is to hear the discussions that happen outside in the lobby. In intermission, my assistant directors will often go out into the lobbies, and just in doing the work that we need to do, we'll come back and say, oh, somebody's really afraid of Ravana, or somebody's really rooting for Rama, or somebody's really confused, why should, right? So there's a way that it begins to affect people in a way that they really take it on as a story that they're rooting for. And to me, that's really moving. And Josh is referencing this conversation outside that happened with these 3 children that came on the matinee we had, and the mother sat in front of them, and she said, so is it gonna give you nightmares? And the little kids went, yes. So do you wanna leave? No. Is it going to give you nightmares? Yes. Well, then we should leave. No. And it was this crisis, right? And to me, I think what I like is that the story is hugely esoteric, hugely poetic, hugely theatrical, but at the core, it's also a really beautiful, simple story. And I think it's what we ultimately all discovered in the process, that once we released ourselves into the story, it's actually this beautiful myth to be shared. We wanted to share some of these questions and thoughts to continue to unpack our experience, both collaborative and artistic, But we have another show this evening, and the actors must get a little bit of food and a little bit of rest before the next show. But thank you so much for your time, and thank you so much for the answers to these questions. And thank you for your time and for joining us for a brief conversation about the Ramayana. So thank you so much.